Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital and one of the fastest-growing megacities in Africa. A city of opportunity, and a city where finding a place to live has become one of the greatest struggles for ordinary people. Despite decades of development, Lagos faces a staggering housing deficit, with millions of homes short of what's needed for its growing population. Lagos' population has risen dramatically, adding hundreds of thousands of residents yearly. Yet housing supply has not kept pace. Lagos currently faces an estimated 3.4 million unit housing deficit, meaning millions of families have no access to adequate housing. Over 70% of Lagos residents are renters, and many spend between 40% to 60% of their income on rent alone. When a family is forced to pay more than half its income for a roof over their heads, it forces hard choices between food, healthcare, education, and simply staying in the city. The price of rent is driven by one simple economic force: demand far exceeding supply, and by policies and market conditions that fail to protect everyday Lagosians. Rapid population growth with insufficient housing units, underinvestment in affordable housing, while upscale developments multiply, ineffective enforcement of rent and housing policies, letting prices rise unchecked. Behind these statistics are millions of real people, workers, graduates, families, who must pay ever-increasing rents. Rents are not just slightly higher. In many areas, they've surged by 80% or more in a single year. All of this happens while salaries barely grow, so Lagosians end up dedicating a larger share of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. This imbalance between the number of people who need housing and the number of homes available is creating pressures that go far beyond rent payments. Workers forced into shared houses and overcrowded rooms. Businesses struggling to pay commercial rents and passing costs to consumers. Relocation pressures pushing people to far suburbs with longer commutes. Rising social tension and risk of crime as housing affordability collapses. To understand why Lagos is one of the toughest cities in the world to rent in today, we must look beyond prices alone. We must see a system where supply falls behind demand, where policy enforcement is weak, and where millions of people are forced to pay the price. Stay with us as we explore real costs, real struggles, and real solutions. In parts 2 through 10 of Priced Out, Lagos and the Rent Crisis.
Today, Lagos rent has reached levels unimaginable for many ordinary residents. On the city's premium islands like Ikoyi and Victoria Island, a 3-bedroom flat can cost between 3 million naira and 9 million naira per year, and even larger duplexes or luxury homes often exceed 10 million naira. On the mainland, more modest homes still range from 1 million naira to 3.5 million naira annually, pushing rents far beyond average incomes. Just a few years ago, the same 3-bedroom apartments often went for less than 1 million naira, but today's increases dwarf that, squeezing tenants and families at every income level.
For many Lagos residents, the cost of rent is more than a number. It defines their daily reality. It shapes how they work, live, save, and even dream. But today, Lagos rent demands a share of income so high that many cannot keep up. Experts say housing costs should not exceed about 30% of income. But in Lagos, many households now spend 40 to 60% or even more of their income on rent just to keep a roof over their heads. This means that after paying rent, little is left for food, healthcare, transport, savings, or education. Many wage earners, teachers, junior staff, healthcare workers, admin officers, receive modest salaries that barely stretch beyond daily needs. Yet they are expected to meet rental demands that far exceed what their monthly pay can sustainably cover. In a city where a basic 1-bedroom apartment can demand annual payments of several million naira, and 2 to 3-bedroom apartments even more, salaried workers face a stark choice: pay rent or pay for other essentials. For fresh graduates and NYSC Corps members deployed to Lagos, the struggle is even greater. Many arrive at their first posting without substantial savings. Rent becomes an immediate financial mountain they must climb. Unable to afford rent alone, many resort to sharing rooms or apartments, sometimes without landlord's knowledge, just to survive in the city. This is not choice, it is a coping mechanism. High rent doesn't just strain finances, it affects quality of life. Many families move further from central Lagos where housing is cheaper but transport costs and commute times rise significantly. As rent eats more income, everyday expenses like food, transport, healthcare, and education become harder to afford, pushing many into perpetual financial stress and insecurity. With such a high proportion of income going to rent, there's little left for savings or investment in the future. For many Lagos residents, this means living paycheck to paycheck, with no financial cushion for emergencies. This economic squeeze undermines financial stability and makes upward mobility, the very reason people come to Lagos, ever harder to achieve. Listen to the stories of residents who struggle with rent every month. Experts warn that when rent consumes such a large share of income, the city risks a breakdown in social and economic stability. Residents cut essential spending, delay major life decisions, and lose hope for upward mobility. This isn't just about housing. It's about the future of Lagos as a vibrant, inclusive city where people can thrive and contribute meaningfully. So far, we've seen how rent has outpaced incomes and how this pressures workers, fresh graduates, and core members alike. In Part 4, we'll explore how Lagosians are coping, from shared housing to informal living arrangements, and what that means for the fabric of life in the city.
When rent becomes unaffordable, people don't stop needing shelter. They adapt. They compromise. They survive. In Lagos today, survival has taken a new form: shared housing, overcrowding, and hidden living arrangements that were never meant to be permanent. Across Lagos, thousands of residents now share apartments, not by choice, but by necessity. Single rooms house 2 or 3 working adults. One-bedroom apartments are split among strangers. Even families share living spaces designed for one household. What used to be temporary has become permanent. In many cases, landlords don't even know how many people actually live in their property. Tenants quietly bring in roommates, partners, or entire families, because revealing the truth could mean eviction. This creates a silent tension: tenants living in fear, landlords suspicious, and agents exploiting both sides. Even married couples are not spared. Some newlyweds delay moving in together. Others share apartments with relatives or friends, quietly, just to cut costs. In Lagos today, marriage does not guarantee housing stability. For families with children, overcrowding affects privacy, mental health, and child development, consequences that last far beyond rent payments. Overcrowded housing comes with hidden costs: poor ventilation, sanitation issues, constant conflict, and emotional stress. People lose dignity. Privacy disappears. Rest becomes impossible, and mental health quietly deteriorates. When too many people are squeezed into too little space, tensions rise, disputes escalate, domestic conflicts increase. Unchecked housing pressure doesn't just create discomfort, it creates instability. Experts warn that housing stress is often linked to increased crime, theft, and neighborhood violence, not because people want to commit crime, but because desperation pushes limits. New landlords who buy properties at high prices often expect higher rents immediately, but long-term tenants, already stretched, cannot keep up. This has led to increasing disputes, forced evictions, and legal battles, fracturing communities and trust. This is no longer a private problem between landlord and tenant. It is a public crisis with social, economic, and security implications. When people cannot afford shelter, the entire city becomes vulnerable. As rents rise, many Lagosians have made a difficult choice: leave the city entirely or move far beyond its borders. In Part 5, we examine the mass relocation to Ogun State and distant suburbs, and the true cost of living far from where you work. Next, Part 5, The Great Exit, relocating out of Lagos.
Every day, before Lagos wakes up, thousands of its workers are already on the move, not from within the city, but from outside it. This is the Great Exit, a quiet migration driven by one thing: rent. As rent prices spiral beyond reach, many Lagosians have made a painful decision to live outside the state entirely, not because they want to, but because they must. Areas like Mao, Ibafo, Magboro, Sango, Agbara, and other Ogun border towns have become the new bedrooms of Lagos. Lower rent comes with a hidden price: transport. What residents save on rent, they lose in fuel, fares, time, and health. Some workers spend 4 to 6 hours daily commuting, time that could have been used for rest, family, or personal growth. Long-distance commuting drains the body and the mind. Fatigue becomes normal. Productivity drops. Health suffers. People arrive at work already exhausted and return home long after dark. This is not work-life balance. This is survival. Relocation doesn't just affect workers, it affects families. Parents miss milestones. Couples grow distant. Children grow up seeing less of their caregivers. The cost of rent is now measured not just in Naira, but in lost time and broken connections. Ironically, the worst hit are not always salaried workers, but skilled professionals who don't earn fixed monthly income. Artisans, creatives, freelancers, technicians, people who keep Lagos running, now struggle to stay close to opportunities. When workers live far from their jobs, productivity drops. Businesses suffer. The economy slows. A city cannot thrive when the people who sustain it can no longer afford to live in it. What we are witnessing is not sustainable. Lagos is stretching itself thin, socially, economically, and physically. If left unchecked, this trend will hollow out the city from within. But it's not only residents who are suffering. Businesses, small and large, are being crushed by rising commercial rents. Next, Part 6, Businesses Under Pressure, the Commercial Rent Crisis.
Across Lagos, shops are closing quietly, not because there are no customers, but because the cost of staying open has become unbearable. Commercial rent in Lagos has exploded. Small shops, offices, and workspaces now face annual rent demands running into millions of Naira, even in areas that were once affordable. For many small businesses, rent alone now consumes 30 to 50% of total operating costs. Micro and small businesses, the backbone of Lagos' economy, are the worst hit. Unlike big corporations, these businesses cannot absorb sudden rent hikes. When rent doubles, something must give. When businesses can't absorb rent increases, they pass the cost on to customers. Higher shop rent means higher prices for food, services, haircuts, repairs, logistics, everything. Even if you don't rent a shop, you still pay for it. As rent eats into profits, business owners cut costs, and the first cuts are often people. Jobs are lost, salaries are delayed, hiring freezes become normal. Unable to afford formal commercial spaces, many businesses move into informal settings, roadsides, pavements, residential areas. This increases congestion, safety risks, and frequent clashes with authorities. When businesses close, government loses revenue, taxes, levies, permits. An economy where small businesses cannot survive is an economy in danger. This is no longer a market issue. It's a policy failure. High commercial rent fuels inflation. The higher the cost of doing business, the higher the cost of living. Rent inflation quietly drives food inflation, service inflation, and transport inflation. But rent didn't rise by accident. In Part 7, we uncover a major contributor: demolitions, displacement, and sudden loss of housing and business spaces.
In Lagos, thousands of homes and business spaces have disappeared, not over decades, but overnight. Demolitions have become a recurring headline, leaving families and business owners scrambling for shelter. From waterfront communities to inner-city neighborhoods, demolitions have removed entire clusters of housing and commercial buildings from the market. Every demolished building is not just a structure lost. It is supply removed from an already overstretched housing system. Demolished residents don't disappear. They move into already crowded neighborhoods, shared apartments, and informal settlements. This sudden influx intensifies competition for available housing, driving rents even higher. Demolitions don't only remove homes, they erase livelihoods. Markets, shops, offices, and workshops vanish, shrinking commercial space supply. When business spaces reduce, rent rises, and consumers eventually pay. Here lies the contradiction. While demolitions reduce housing stock, new developments are largely luxury-focused, priced far beyond the reach of average Lagosians. Affordable housing is demolished. Luxury housing replaces it. When housing supply shrinks artificially, scarcity is created, and scarcity fuels speculation. Landlords raise rents not because costs increased overnight, but because they can. Displacement without resettlement breeds instability. Communities fracture. Social trust erodes. Housing stress is a known trigger for crime, unrest, and urban insecurity. Despite the scale of displacement, there is little transparency around long-term resettlement or compensation. Demolitions without a housing replacement plan deepen the crisis. But demolitions are not the only accelerant. In Part 8, we examine another powerful force driving rent beyond reach: agents, middlemen, and unchecked fees.
For years, Lagos has talked endlessly about development, but the real question remains: development for whom? The absence of affordable housing is no longer just a policy oversight. It's a full-blown crisis, with a housing deficit estimated in the millions of units as rapid urbanization outpaces supply. Most new housing developments in Lagos are not built for the average resident. Instead, they target high-income buyers, foreign investors, and short-term rental markets like Airbnb, leaving everyday workers priced out. The market naturally builds where profit is highest, in luxury areas, while the government has failed to fill this critical affordability gap, allowing inequality to widen as rental costs soar due to inflation and dollar-denominated loans. While Lagos adds hundreds of thousands of new residents every year from rural migration and natural growth, affordable housing delivery remains painfully slow, fragmented across small initiatives, and woefully small-scale compared to the massive demand. These pilot projects and scattered efforts simply cannot solve a million-unit housing deficit. They highlight the urgent need for bold, larger-scale solutions to prevent further overcrowding in slums and informal settlements. Housing is far more than just a commodity. It's vital infrastructure, much like roads, water, and power, essential for boosting productivity, ensuring public safety, and maintaining social stability in a megacity like Lagos. When government leaves housing entirely to the unchecked market, inequality explodes dramatically, creating significant societal challenges including sprawling slums, lengthy commutes, and worsening living conditions for the majority. Practical solutions exist even amidst high inflation by prioritizing strategies that enable building faster with innovative techniques, cheaper through efficient models, and closer to major job centers to cut commute times. These proven approaches include mass high-density housing constructed near employment hubs like Victoria Island and Ikeja, public-private partnerships that enforce strict affordability quotas for low-income residents, and flexible rent-to-own schemes to help families build equity over time. Additionally, embracing modular and prefabricated housing methods can drastically speed up construction timelines, while strategically reviving hundreds of abandoned government projects across the state would quickly add much-needed inventory to the market. In this age of advanced AI, Lagos has the tools to plan housing much better, leveraging technology to inform and lead evidence-based policy decisions rather than relying on outdated guesses. Specifically, AI-driven housing demand forecasting can predict population surges accurately, land use optimization can identify underutilized plots efficiently, and real-time rent monitoring platforms can track price trends to guide interventions. Government must step in to regulate the chaotic rental market effectively, not through harmful price fixing, which distorts supply, but by enforcing transparency to protect vulnerable tenants from exploitation. Key reforms outlined in initiatives like the Lagos Tenancy Bill 2025 include establishing a central rental registry for all properties, mandating licensed agents only to curb fraud, and requiring standardized digital rent agreements for clarity and enforcement. Complementing these, enforced caps on arbitrary fees such as advance rent demands beyond 1 year and comprehensive tenant education programs are crucial to safeguarding dignity, preventing evictions, and regulating fair access to housing. If nothing changes soon, Lagos risks becoming a divided city where only the wealthy can afford to live close to economic opportunities, forcing the majority into distant peripheries with inadequate transport links. This dystopian future brings higher crime rates from youth unemployment and desperation, deeper inequality across social classes, economic decline from lost productivity, and the relentless expansion of slums with dire living conditions. In our final part, we bring everything together cohesively: the deep pain of the housing crisis, the root causes behind failed policies, and a clear, actionable path forward for real change. This is an urgent call to action for Lagos leaders. urging a comprehensive, multifaceted approach that unites government commitment, private sector innovation, cutting-edge technology like AI, and active community engagement to finally deliver affordable housing for all.
Lagos is not just Africa's largest city. It is home. Home to dreams. Home to workers. Home to families trying to survive. But today, that home is slipping out of reach. Across Lagos, rent has doubled, tripled, sometimes overnight. Salary earners are drowning. Freelancers are pushed out. New graduates are stranded. People are not asking for luxury, only shelter. When housing becomes unaffordable, everything else breaks. Marriages are delayed. Families are divided. Mental health declines. This is how cities lose their soul. History teaches us something clear. When people cannot live with dignity, insecurity follows. Housing pressure fuels desperation. Desperation fuels crime. Government cannot outsource shelter to the market alone. Development must include the people who clean the offices, build the roads, teach the children, and keep the city running. Ignoring housing is not neutrality, it is a decision. Lagos still has a choice. These are not impossible demands. They are urgent necessities. This is not a Lagos problem alone. It is a Lagosian problem. Speak, document, engage policymakers, demand accountability. A city is not measured by its skyscrapers, but by whether its people can afford to live beneath them. If Lagos becomes a city only the wealthy can live in, then Lagos has failed its people.